That law was closed last year, thank goodness. But during the time there was an AG slush fund, incumbent Swanson signed a settlement that transferred $250,000 of taxpayer money, that's your money and my money, into the pockets of Acorn, who then endorsed her and helped her win re-election. Now, you may expect this in Chicago or some other states, but it's most unfortunate that this actually happened here in Minnesota. And what's even more unfortunate is that the news media doesn't seem to want to report it. And she's never had to answer simple questions about it. I mean, maybe she has a reason for doing this, but no one's ever asked her, and she's never been asked to explain it under oath or before a hearing or even on television. Just why did she give $250,000 of our money to Acorn? Where did that money go? Who received that money? What did they do with it? And especially, did they spend any of it to help you with your campaign, which would, of course, been quite illegal. So that's one aspect of a lot of scandal and turmoil in that office. Another one is that about half of the lawyers, according to CCO TV, about half of the lawyers there have quit, have been fired. It's been a disaster. They've had so many fine lawyers who have left there, and they've complained about what went on. In fact, the legislative auditor looked in on it, and he got sworn statements from, I believe, up to 7 of the attorneys. Now, these are her attorneys. These are people that they hired. These are assistant attorney generals of the state of Minnesota, licensed lawyers, and they all have apparently claimed under oath that things were going on in that office that were improper or illegal. And and once again, this you would think this would be front page news, but it's not.
That's a serious charge from 7 lawyers inside the Attorney General's office, and nothing's happened with that.
It's really quite something.
No investigation. I mean, so they file a complaint. Who do they file a complaint with?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, if you Google and you Google the I-Team, the WCCO TV I-Team, you'll see live interviews with one of these lawyers talking about the things that he saw in that office.
CCO, WCCO, and then Lori Swanson. They're just those 3 things, and will come up to the top.
Probably. And if you put the word scandal in there, you probably get more.
Even okay.
But yeah. So these are the kinds of problems that you expect when you have an office that's controlled by one party for 40 years. I mean, what would your car look and smell like if you didn't clean it out for 40 years?
Now, don't get personal here, okay? No, that's a problem.
It's really, and this is a very serious business, because the person most responsible for the integrity of the election system in our state is the Attorney General. Because the Attorney General is the lawyer for the people of our state. And so protecting the people's right to vote and protecting the integrity of those individual votes, that's the Attorney General's job. The buck stops there.
The Attorney General, one of their primary roles is with the voting?
Oh, of course, sure.
I don't think people know that.
Well, they ought to, and they ought to go look at the statutes that say that the county attorney is the first line of defense. But if the county attorney fails, if the county attorney doesn't do a good job, if the county attorney doesn't vigorously enforce the law and prosecute voter fraud, then the Attorney General has to step in and take over.
Well, I know in Maplewood there's an investigation going on, but not from the county attorney's office. As a matter of fact, my understanding is they're refusing to look into and investigate this and gather and take this information. And we've even gone to the Secretary of State and to the Attorney General and said, or not we, but some other people have, I haven't, gone to them and said, hey, there's a problem here. And right now, I hear there's a big stonewall going on. So the county attorney, which then ultimately is underneath the Attorney General, right? And this stuff isn't being looked into and explored. I mean, that's a big problem.
Well, once again, it's really not surprising when you realize that the 2 people that are kind of managing the system, the Secretary of State sets up the rules. Think of a freeway. Someone's got to paint those lines and set up the stop signs and get those red lights in place. But then what if someone drives 100 miles an hour weaving in and out? You have to have an Attorney General who's going to enforce those laws. So you need those 2 offices to be working properly to have a clean election system. Currently, both our Secretary of State, Mr. Ritchie, and our Attorney General, Ms. Swanson, they are both ACORN endorsed.
Right.
This is a very bad situation for our state. We may have the worst election system in the United States because not only do we have two ACORN people managing the election, but we have a vouching law, which is the worst in the United States. And for viewers who don't know what that means, on the day of the election, you show up at the table to vote and you bring 15 people in, and if you're a registered voter, you can vouch them in, and they get to vote with no identification of any kind whatsoever. Are they felons? We don't know. Are they illegally in the country? We don't know. Have they voted 3 times that day somewhere else? We don't know. They're not tracking it. They're not keeping records on this, and it's a very, very troubling, disturbing law. It's called the vouching law. It is extremely rare. I believe there's only 3 states in the country that still have this law, which might have made sense in the old days when you were a small farming town.
Right.
You could vouch for someone because everybody knew everybody. But in a big city, it is an open invitation to massive voter fraud. And so to have a vouching law and to have people from ACORN managing that, it is just the worst of all possible systems. Now, the way that we propose to correct this is photo ID. We simply need a system where voters have to present a photo ID. Could be a passport, could be a driver's license. You have to have a photo.
Common sense. I mean, common sense would say, hey.
Yes, exactly right. And even in Minnesota, even among the Democrats, it's over 70%. I believe in the state at large, it may be over 80% of people want photo ID. But again, our 2 ACORN endorsed state officials don't want it.
Well, surprise, surprise. So with this, I mean, I heard a story recently where some people, new immigrants, have their citizenship and can vote, and they go through the process, and they know they know people in the immigrant community who don't have that, but they've seen them come vote. But there's a fear factor in actually coming forward and saying something.
Right. I've heard a lot of that. Yeah, I've heard that. I've been traveling around this. I've done 5 tours of the state now. Okay. I have to meet 3 million people in a couple of months. So I've done 2 plane tours, a bus tour, which was 21 cities in 3 days, and then I've gone by myself in my truck. All right. And I meet people all over the state, and many of them have been involved in the election. They're poll watchers or they're election judges. And many of them have these horror stories of people, because of this vouching law, people come in and they may be felons, they may be illegally in the country, and they may have voted multiple times and sometimes even in other states. And because of the nature of this vouching law, they're not even checking that. They're not even monitoring for those things. So when people tell you, well, where's the evidence of voter fraud, you just tell them, we have a vouching law.
Well, that's really ballot stuffing. That's the new technical way to do ballot stuffing.
Well, I mean, why else would you have a vouching law? Why else would you why would you permit people to vote who have no identification of any kind whatsoever? And then not follow up on those people. It's not like they're voting with a provisional ballot like they do in some states. You vote provisionally because you lost your license or whatever, and they hold your vote until you can prove that you actually have a right to vote. Right. And then your vote counts. But not in Minnesota. If you're vouched in, you're in.
Well, that makes too much sense. Maybe that's why it's not in Minnesota. But then again, that's part of 40 years of an Attorney General's office that's been controlled by one party.
It's time to clean out that office, and I'm looking forward to getting photo ID in place to protect the integrity of our voting system.
Well, it just seems to me that it just doesn't matter what party you're with, and you're running on the Republican ticket. But in this case, at this point in time, that you would just go and say, you know what, I don't care what party I'm in, for the sake of justice, there needs to be new eyes in there. I mean, that should be the rationale. It should be a nonpartisan, it should be a ethical position to say, I'm going to go and vote for somebody who I think is a credible, smart person that will expose the corruption that's been in there. For that reason alone.
Well, it's really become a national embarrassment for our state. As I travel around the country, people just shake their head and say, you've had that 40-year political machine controlling your elections. You had the worst election in the country in 2008. And because of that election, we sent Mr. Franken to Washington, and he became the 60th vote that has now burdened our nation with this federal health care takeover law, which the majority of people don't want. And now we have to go through all of the methods and procedures to stop it, to challenge it in court, and to repeal it, which is a tremendous burden on our country because our state failed to reform our election system years ago when other states were putting in place photo ID and other forms of cleaner and safer elections. So we really have a duty to the whole country, I think, to reform this system and to make our elections clean before we do more damage.
And to show that it can happen. And I think in Minnesota, that will be such a drastic change, and that there'll be such a visible change in our election system and the integrity of it, that will be really a shining light for the state of Minnesota if that takes place and we get a new Attorney General in there to help in that process.
Well, and there's really no reason not to do it. I mean, some people used to argue that it would disenfranchise people or it would reduce the vote, but now we have experience where in other states, in Georgia and in Indiana and Florida and these other states, and in Indiana, for example, when they put photo ID in, the voting went up. Over 2 elections, I think it went up 15%.
Whoa.
So there's a dramatic increase in people voting.
That's the cry out for why you do. That's why Acorn says we need to do it this way so we get better voter turnout. But in reality, it's suppressing the vote.
It's just it's a false argument that's been empirically, that is scientifically disproven in those states that have actually put this in place. And then many other people vote who didn't believe that their vote counted because they thought the system was corrupt. And when they see photo ID and they go, okay, now I believe the elections are real and I'm going to participate, and they're part of the people that come in and vote. So it actually increases the number of people voting and the percentage of people that are voting.
Okay, we have a phone call. So caller, do you have a comment or a question?
Yes, Tim, this is Ralph calling in.
Hello, Ralph.
And I have 2 questions, and I'm going to start with the first one, and then I'll give you the second one, then I want to hang up and listen, because this is the most interesting program that I've heard in a long time.
Well, didn't you watch last week, Ralph?
Yes, well, I tell you, this Chris Barton is really a breath of fresh air, I'll tell you that.
Absolutely.
But anyway, here's my first question. You know, getting the judicial back on the, I'm trying to think of the word constitutional law, and the legislature being the driver and persons of that law, and the judges having to answer to the legislature now instead of the way they've gotten it turned around, so the judges are in control. And I wondered what the Attorney General could do in that matter, and then also on the health care issue, and then I'd like to sit and listen to the answer. Thank you.
You bet. Well, thank you for that question. Once again, the job of the Attorney General is to be the lawyer for the people of the state of Minnesota. And currently, our current incumbent represents just the far left wing of the Democratic Party. I mean, she's called for a single-payer health care system, which is, again, that's about a 25% of the people would support that. She's against photo ID, and that's about 14 or 15% of the people support that. She takes these far-left minority positions where the vast majority of the people are on the other side. Most people in Minnesota want to repeal the federal health care law. Up to 80% want photo ID. So as the lawyer for all the people, I want to represent the poor and the needy, as well as those that build businesses and give jobs to our people. And so you can do that in a number of ways. In some ways you can actually go in and step in and do take legal action.
Okay.
Sometimes you go to the legislature and you propose new laws and you argue for them, and sometimes you go out on the road and you tell people what your legal opinion is about what would be good for our state and what's hurting us.
Okay.
So for example, as Attorney General, I can't implement photo ID, but I can sure go around the state